Hello everyone and welcome to another Windows 98 build. Some of you might remember my previous over-the-top Windows 98 machine and now be wondering why I would build another one but with less power. Well, while my trusty old Pentium 4 powered setup runs most Windows 95 and 98 era games perfectly fine, the idea was to have enough performance to occasionally be able to play those later games from the years 2000 to 2002 that demand a bit more power, covering a bit wider variety of retro games. However, this time I'm shifting focus on glide support and better DOS compatibility. I think you're really going to enjoy this configuration, but before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the components, let's kick things off with the PC case. I wanted to find a beige 90s PC case that would look as generic as possible, and I found this monstrosity. A beige whatever brand full ATX box. With a few small modifications, it covers all the features I'm looking for, and it is just delightfully ugly. It looks like whoever designed this case was just tossing shapes together and see if they stick. I love it. Functionality wise, this box needs those few small modifications, starting with cooling. Like always with these old PC cases, cooling is rather non-existent, so I had to cut proper mounts for fans. One for a 92mm intake fan and two for 60mm exhaust fans. I disassembled the frame, sanded and polished all the parts so that the frame doesn't have a single sharp edge on it. I gave the front panel a little putty work before painting it with off-white. The finishing turned out quite nice, and with all the sharp edges smoothed out, this case is now very user-friendly. In order to enhance the cable management and keep everything nice and tidy, I also drilled a couple of additional pass-throughs. Not only is this now aesthetically pleasing, but overall makes this setup much easier to work with later on. Originally the motherboard was going to be a MSI MS6199 that supports slot 1 Pentium 2003s. A 600 MHz slot 1 Pentium 3 processor will handle the processing, and the 3 RAM slots will be filled with 128 MB RAM sticks, which adds up to 384 MB in total. However, a little niggle occurred with this board, which we will come back to later in the video. As mentioned earlier, this time I wanted to focus on glide support, and for the primary GPU I found this Voodoo 3 2000. Voodoo 3s have notoriously insufficient heatsinks, so I replaced the original heatsink with a larger copper one, and added another one on the backside as well. I also wanted to improve backwards compatibility with older games that supports glide, and I have this Orchid Righteous Voodoo 1, so I'm adding it in there. The most exciting aspect of this build was directly inspired by LGR's Megaluminum Monster, that being the sound setup.
a Sound Blaster Live combined with Orpheus 2 LT, which is spiced up with a X2GS wavetable daughterboard, a solution which significantly improves compatibility with DOS games. Much like the two Voodoo cards, this solution is meant to maximize compatibility with different games as much as possible and to operate simultaneously in perfect harmony without needing to change the channels. While Sound Blaster Live will be the primary sound card in Windows, Orpheus 2 will handle the sound for DOS games, MIDI included. Then there's your basic quality of life improvements, a USB 2.0 expansion card for convenience and a trusty old D-Link DGE 528T Ethernet card for networking. And we have some bass to populate, so of course we need a CD reader and just to show off a CD burner. And of course we need to have a floppy reader, for which I don't have a ribbon cable right now, so it's not currently utilized, although it probably never even will be. The last two bays will be filled with a 3.5-inch fan controller, which can also be used to adjust the LED strip inside the case, and this 5.25-inch hard drive bay, which will house an SD to ID adapter. mentioned the MSI motherboard having a little niggle, I wasn't just saying that. The motherboard simply refused to boot, and I know it worked earlier, so I don't know how I managed to fry it. Luckily, I came across this Asus P2B-F motherboard for free from a former colleague. This motherboard has all the features as the previous one, even better in some ways, so this was truly a lucky break. And now it's time for the configuration, which I'm doing based on advice I got from seasoned hobbyists. To kick things off, I select load setup defaults in the BIOS and then disable a few unnecessary functions to free up some resources. To ensure that Orpheus 2 gets the correct resources allocated to it, we're reserving IRQ5 and DMA1 for ISA. Then I formatted a 64GB SD card to FAT32 using SuperFDisk. 10GB for the operating system and 50GB for games should be just about perfect. Before installing any drivers, DMA mode should be enabled first. I always install the chipset drivers first. I just chose the latest official ones for this chipset. Orpheus 2 will be the first card in line to be configured. After setting it to a ISA slot, I installed the Windows drivers from a CD during boot, and I just copied the DOS drivers from the CD to C drive. By the way, the DOS drivers need to be activated with the orf-init executable every time you jump into DOS. As you can see, MPU 401 isn't showing yet, which means that it needs to be set up manually in the Add New Hardware section. Next up, we have Sound Blaster Live. Notice that I'm routing the signal from the Sound Blaster Live's line out to the line in of the Orpheus 2 and from the Orpheus 2's line out to the speakers. This way both sound cards can work simultaneously without the need to switch channels. For live, I'm using Joseph Joestar's driver package again. However, I always refrain from installing the drivers for live during the first boot, as it might accidentally install VMD drivers. For Windows 98 we only want the VXD drivers. Also, those drivers won't be used for live in this setup. After the live drivers are installed, I make sure that it is set as preferred audio device and Roland MPU 401 is set as MIDI device and do the necessary tweaks. Now the USB 2.0 drivers. And then we need some networking. Now Voodoo 1. At this point it's good to double check BIOS settings to ensure that the VGA sequence is set to AGP/PCI rather than PCI/AGP, as it might cause problems. As you can see, in Device Manager it says that Voodoo is working properly even before installing the drivers, so I'm not sure if installing them separately is even necessary. However, some users recommend doing so before proceeding to the Voodoo 3 drivers. And finally we arrive to Voodoo 3. With Voodoo 3 now designated as the primary display device, it's essential to ensure that Voodoo 1 games can still use Voodoo 1. Finally, after all the drivers are installed, I'm installing a collection of official unmodified updates released by Microsoft, including security patches and hotfixes for Windows 98 SE, all put together by KS Hacker. It's simply called Windows 98 SE Update CD. Here I'm using version 1.0, although version 1.1 is already available, but this footage was filmed before it was released. After using this machine for a few months now, I'm delighted to say that this setup works wonderfully. The dual sound card solution routed through the same channel works as well as I hoped. While the Sound Blaster Live is the primary sound card in Windows and handles games by default, I can still change sound card settings for different games, I mean the ones that actually has a sound setup. Of course, EAX games will be utilizing the Live card, that's a no-brainer. Despite its price, I think the Orpheus 2 really is worth the money. The sound quality is nice and crisp, no interference of any kind, and the compatibility is excellent. It handles both the games that can be run only in DOS, but also the DOS games that can also be played in Windows. And the X2GS wavetable is just lovely.
Acceleration.
And the Voodoo 3, of course, is the default display device, but some older games don't work very well with it. For example, Carmageddon here. The HUD is flickering weirdly and the game just isn't very enjoyable to play like this. So this is where the Voodoo 1 saves the day. But since Voodoo 3 is the primary GPU, we have to utilize the Voodoo 1 card in another way. That's by copying the Voodoo 1 drivers into the game folder where the executable is located, and then it should work. And it does, no more flickering. Since part of this configuration draws inspiration from LGR's Megaluminum Monster, I thought covering the side panels with wood grain vinyl would be a fun little homage. and given the effort I put into the interior, I also decided to illuminate it with a little LED strip and with a custom window on the side panel. The top side I covered with a vinyl that has a brushed aluminum look, and it looks just as dorky as I hoped. Oh, and since this is a glide machine, I decided to name this build Glide. Get it? Glide. Glide. I'm sorry. Regarding the future of this machine, this motherboard supports 800 MHz Pentium 3s, and I actually came across a Voodoo 3 3000. I think it's safe to say that there's going to be an upgrade video sometime in the future. Besides, it might be interesting to see some benchmarks of that upgrade. All in all, I'm very happy how well this build came together.
Right, so that's it for now, and we'll be visiting Glide later on at an unspecified point in time. I hope you enjoyed this journey, and we'll meet in the next one. Bye.